and she drinks bourbon. So it is my distinct honor for the second to last time of this convention, but tonight, to introduce Dr. Joe Jorgensen.
Oh my gosh, I don't have enough hands for all this.
I'll just have some of that.
Any engineers here think I'm doing okay with that?
I think you're doing great.
What? No, I don't think that will spill. Tell you what. Hopefully I won't be so boring that nobody's over there looking at the auction items. Although, look at the auction items before 10:30. So, thank you so much for having me here. As many of you know, I'm a teacher, and teachers hate excuses, kind of like the dog ate my homework. One reason I don't assign homework is I don't have to worry about listening to excuses for it being late. But I'm going to start off tonight's speech with an excuse. I know, the dog ate my speech. What can I say? No, actually, I had already had most of the speech done, but earlier this week, I got what I thought was a mild case of food poisoning because I just had a bad stomach ache. I thought it'll be over in no time. I had that bad stomach ache for like 4 days. I didn't start feeling good again until last night. So, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm going to rely on notes a little more than I usually do. And also, for the first time ever, I might have to rely on glasses. So this is not usual, but I wanted to come here and talk. And again, you can see now I'm feeling like pretty much fine. It was during the prep days that I wasn't feeling fine. But I didn't want to miss tonight for 2 reasons. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but my last official event on the 2020 presidential campaign was in North Carolina. Thank you. Thank you for setting that up. And it was also the most fun. And no, I'm not saying that because I'm standing here in North Carolina. You can look at all the other states I've spoken at, and there have been many, and not once have I said that. But I just remembered there was a lot of rain, a lot of laughing, and a whole lot of alcohol. And we had a blast. So I hope a lot of you were able to come to that. I don't even know where it was.
Distillery, Durham, North Carolina.
Durham, okay. I knew it was towards the eastern side, but so much fun. I am so glad that was my last stop. I can't imagine a better stop. So, of course, I had to come back to North Carolina again. But also, this is a brand new speech, again, which since I wasn't feeling well, I put more than enough time into writing it. It's the actual practice. But I got the idea for this while I was watching in mid-December the LNC chair debate that was streamed. Well, there were probably more than one, I don't know, but I watched the one that was mid-December, and my name came up kind of in passing. And just the wheels started turning in my head, and I just kept thinking about it, and eventually it turned into a speech after thinking about it. So I want to start off by saying, and I'm sorry, I might just chance it and put the water up here after all. That one of my proudest and happiest moments as not just an LP candidate, but just being in the LP was shortly after the 2020 presidential campaign in 2020. I stumbled across a post online from one of the founders of the Radical Caucus, Mark Montoni, who was posting something saying that I had not deviated from the platform at all. And I felt so honored. It's one thing for anybody in the party, anybody who's even, you know, in a pragmatic caucus to say that. But for somebody in the radical caucus, a founder no less, about how I didn't stray from the platform, I really felt good about that. Because that's who I am and that's what I'm going for, that we have to stick to the platform. So libertarians, oh yes, another founding member, thank you very much, appreciate your work. So libertarians come in all sorts of flavors. And unfortunately for decades, oh thank you, unfortunately for decades, there have been tensions between two particular flavors in the party. And I think if I gave them the names, the radical side and the pragmatic side, you would kind of know who I'm talking about here. And unfortunately, as I said, over the decades, there's been some tension with them. And this is what got me to thinking after the speech. So over the years, a lot of good libertarians have put themselves out for in the political arena to run for office. They devote a lot of time, they devote a lot of money, they devote a lot of, they take work time off, and it can turn into lost income as well as just spending some of your own money. And then they end up defending their campaigns against fellow libertarians. In fact, a lot of times they end up they spend more time, more effort defending their campaigns to other libertarians than even to the people on the outside. Sometimes, unfortunately, even within our own campaign, we end up having to defend things. So goodness knows that the playing field is already so sloped against us. And we really don't need any of this extra work because we're already spending so much time with others. That being said, I can think of many times when we as a party put forth candidates who were supposed to have some kind of special political knowledge or some kind of special talent that would somehow make them noticeable. And then when they come out with their ideas, then we think, uh-oh, wait a minute, no, they're not going according to our principles. And so then we can become frustrated. And I suspect that this is partly what's going on with the so-called pragmatism. Why it's got such a bad name. Because I don't think, and for the most part, I don't think that it's people who are trying to sell out freedom, sell out liberty. I think that many of them are just focusing on what actually works. And I think that most libertarians would give them understanding, would give them grace for supporting that, because they know that they have the best interest in hearts, in their hearts of what they're doing. But over the years, we've seen many times someone who claimed the need to be practical or pragmatic, and basically it was a cover. It was a cover because they wanted to compromise their principles, or they just really didn't have any principles. This just seemed like the best party to do it again. And what we're talking about are two competing ideas here. Principled compromise as opposed to compromise of principle. So again, those are two different things. And I'm going to suggest that we're fine with the first one, at least most people should be, because here what we're doing is we're giving up something that we value less in order to get something better, such as giving up Federal Reserve notes for, let's say, gold. That would be a nice trade. And sometimes you have to do that in a campaign. Perhaps you don't get you have a choice and you decide, okay, you know what, maybe instead of hiring new teachers, maybe if I'm going to run for the school board or run for a local office, maybe I'll give that up if instead we can get school choice and at least give some parents some choice of where to go. So sometimes it's a matter of you can't get everything on your wish list. And that's one thing. The second thing is being unprincipled in a bad sense. There's no such thing as being moral or honest when you have to get rid of your principles, when you have to change what you believe. And at the founding of our party in 1971, there was some back and forth about should we even be into politics, and especially at the time because there weren't a lot of educational, as many educational foundations and other foundations doing the work, and so many people said, hey, let's just have the Libertarian Party and not run anybody. Oops, the glasses are coming on. Hope you got all your pictures. No, this is fun. Thank you. So some libertarians were saying, why do we want to get in dirty with political, electoral politics at all? Because political institutions are corrupt, government's corrupt, and the other political parties are corrupt. So should we even be in this game? And it's not a bad question because if you think about it, politics is at kind of the end of society to where if you can change culture above, then of course the politics will just come through. So you don't have to run candidates if you can change the culture so that people are looking for liberty and freedom. So I can understand that. Just let's start the domino chain further up and not run for office. But the thing is, the decision was made that the Libertarian Party would exist to run candidates and fight elections. In other words, we actually chose to do politics. So we're doing politics. When we made that decision, we recognized that principles and practice are not mutually exclusive. Even more, if you think about it, the only point in having principles is to put them into practice. What good are principles? Thank you. What good are the principles if we can't put them into practice? And this is what our opponents accuse us of doing. They accuse us of being a debate society in which, you know, we sit there and have debate club sessions on who should own the sidewalks. Now, I feel very strongly about who should own the sidewalks, and I'm sure my answer is right, and I'll be happy to debate that with anyone. But they do have a point in that there are probably other more important things that we should tend to first. Some more life and death situations that we need to look at first, as opposed to being a debating society. So we formed a party, a political party, so that we could make real changes in the world. Or at least we decided we were going to give it a try, to do basically radicalism in the real world. So it's really easy to be radical and make no difference in the world. Again, something we get accused of. Something that we've seen in other places. We've seen this with cults. There have been a lot of cults who will have some type of doomsday. Some type of doomsday that the world's going to end and you need to come join us by this date. Of course, everybody ignores them. Then the date comes and goes, and they're still ignored. So, very radical, nothing gets done. And then there's also the climate activism group, Just Stop Oil. But, and you know, they're causing a lot of problems out there, but they're really not making much change. As far as I can tell, probably the only change that they're making is keeping people away from climate activism because they don't like to see priceless works of art destroyed. So perhaps they're doing the opposite of what they intend. But it's also easy to do the opposite, to exist in the real world and never be radical. So think of the average person, he or she, who holds a job, goes to a job that maybe they don't love, just enough to pay the bills and go along with the system, don't like what the politicians are doing, they don't like the world that's been created for them, but they're just going to exist and they're not going to try any radicalism at all. Successful libertarian politics is neither of these. It's neither radicalism but not in the real world, or being in the real world but no radicalism. So the word radical is from the Latin radix. Being a professor here, I had to touch on some academic topic, right? Meaning root. No tree can stand without roots, whether we're looking at it metaphorically or a literal tree. In order for a literal tree to live, it has to live in the real world, and it needs nutrients. It needs sunshine. It needs water. It needs other things to grow. Now, for a metaphorical tree of liberty, that means that people's understanding that everything worth having depends on freedom. Justice depends on it. Prosperity depends on it. Innovation depends on it. Even thought depends on freedom. And as libertarians, we can measure our political success by how many laws we got rid of that took away our freedoms, and also by the number of people who are on our side demanding it. Now, sometimes the word Puritanism gets kicked around in libertarian circles. Sometimes it's a badge of honor. Other times it's considered to be a put down. One politician many years ago said, politics at its purest is philosophy in action. So here we're talking purity, politics, philosophy, and action all together with those 8 words. And when they're linked together, you have a shot of getting your principles into practice. And that is what we chose to do as a political party. Principles and practice are not either or. They are both and. That's why I believe, and once it leaves the pages of a philosophy book, that libertarianism is real world radicalism. So what does that entail? Well, a couple of things. The first part of the answer is obvious. We've got to remember that we're all going on the same train. And you may have heard this analogy before, where if you look in the party, there are people who don't want any government at all, and there are people who just want limited government. But we're not even close to limited government. So we're all on the train, all headed towards the same direction. And then once the limited government people are happy enough, they can get off the train, and the rest of us just keep going. Yeah, notice I said us. So regardless of whether we're passionate for the more government, and by more I mean very limited, the Thomas Jeffersonians, versus no government, we need to support our candidates. So once we send our candidates into the fray, we have to have their backs and keep disagreements behind closed doors. We shouldn't do things that make it harder for our candidates to go out there when they're already dodging bullets from the other side. And it means having the grace and humility to support libertarian candidates who've decided to put in a lot of time, energy, and money of their own, when maybe we would do it a little differently and maybe choose a different analogy or bring up a different topic. It means we have to circle our wagons and point the guns outward and never inward. Now, the second part is communication. And we have to communicate in a way that people will want to give us power to put our policies into practice. In other words, take our radicalism and put it into practice. Namely, we have to communicate to people, but not just using words that we understand or words that would convince us that we want liberty or freedom. We need to do it in such a way that it conveys to them that we are giving them what they want, that we take into account where they are now, what their point of view is, and show them that, yes, we care about them and we want them to flourish, and this is the way that they can do it. In other words, not my money, my body, but here, your money, your family, let's see, let me show you how my great product here can help you. Now, for you and me, it's a really small and simple step to go from having liberty, having more liberty, to having more money, or having liberty and worrying less about utility bills, or getting a bigger house, or going on a nice vacation. But we have to understand that other people don't see that jump. They don't see how more liberty can bring them better vacations or what it is they're looking at. Likewise, to you and me, having less government is equal to having less violence. We also understand that less government is having less to worry about my kids' education or having more free time. But again, for other people out there, that's not such a simple, easy step. They don't see the connections. So whenever we are arguing for our principles, I'm always looking for principles that make practical benefits out of our principles in an obvious manner. In other words, not let's just put the principles under the rug and let's just talk about this pragmatic stuff, but instead, let me show you how the best thing that's going to happen to you in your life are our principles. It's more, though, than just connecting the dots. That's the first step, is just connecting the dots, making the dots a little closer so they can see more liberty, more freedom, can lead them to whatever. We also need to take into account with how our brains work, which is where I come in, since I've got a PhD in psychology, and I have taught cognitive psychology, and I actually teach a little section of cognitive in each of my intro classes. What we know from research in cognitive psychology is that it's much easier for us to remember concrete words or words that bring imagery into our mind, such as apple or rock. Those words you're going to remember a lot more than abstract words. And yes, those abstract words would include liberty, freedom, accountability, responsibility. In other words, all of the words that we tend to use, all of the words that excite us, all of the words that we know will give us what we want. Now, which do libertarians typically use? As I said, the more abstract terms. Even more, further research was done, and by the way, this is older research. This is not anything new. We've known about it for a long time. Somebody looked at words that are, again, imagery words, something that brings a picture to mind, compared to words that are meaningful. And a meaningful word might be something like death, or panic, or attraction, something that we would have a lot of connection to, something that would make an impact with us. Research was done showing that these imagery words work even better than the meaningful words. Sometimes the meaningful words actually make it worse, which goes against common sense. But that's what's so much fun about psychology. A lot of people say, oh, psychology, it's just common sense. no. I could tell you a whole list of studies in which you get the opposite result of what you're looking for. So sometimes my examples sound practical to the point that they're just downright pedestrian. And again, that's good. That's how our principles are landed. That's how radical becomes real world, by other people understanding them and remembering them. Now, that's why even though I've always been a radical at heart, sometimes I don't sound like one, at least not in the stereotypical sense. And that's what kind of brought this whole topic on, because the comment that I heard in the debate was somebody was asking and maybe you guys remember this, because I believe the three of the, 4 or 5, I guess there were 5 candidates maybe, 3 of them are here. They were saying something about supporting candidates, presidential candidates. And would you support the more pragmatic candidates like Gary Johnson and Jorgensen? Or would you support and immediately I thought, I'm a radical. What are you doing calling me a pragmatic? And also, that was why Mark Montoni was defending me, because it was somebody who was posting online how horrible the candidate was, because I just wasn't going according to any principles at all. It was just pragmatic stuff. But again, as Mark said, I didn't go against a single party platform principle. I just put it in words that people will remember more and that people will be more excited about and that people will want to support us with. I'm just trying to relate our principles to everyday lives of people. So somebody like the dad who's struggling to put food on the table, the mom who's worried about the son's education, the party, I'm sorry, I was doing really good there. Our principles gain power and our party gains votes when the dad sees and the mom sees how our principles solve their problems. Again, not abstract intellectual principles, but principles such as here, more food on the table at a lower cost, better education for your children, and by the way, educating your children the way you want them educated. And to do that in a way that science tells us they're more likely to remember. Keep in mind, no physicist has ever said, I've got this theory that's great on paper, but it's just not so good in practice. A theory that's bad in practice is just a bad theory. Likewise, a principle that doesn't work in practice is a bad principle. So if it's in our platform and it can't be shown to help our everyday lives and improve our everyday lives, then why is it there and why is it a principle? Our principles are good. We're in politics to put them into practice. To get in a position to do that, our job is to convince millions of Americans not only that they are right, but also that what makes them right is that they work. Thanks so much.